The medicine of East Asia is based on a science that does not hold itself separate from the phenomena that it seeks to understand. Our medicine did not grow out of petri dish experimentation or double-blind studies. It arose from observing nature and our part in it. East Asian medicine evolves not from the examination of dead structures, but rather from living systems with their complex, mutually entangled interactions. Welcome to Qiological. I'm Michael Max, the host of this podcast that goes in depth on issues pertinent to practitioners and students of East Asian medicine. Dialogue and discussion have always been elemental to Chinese and other East Asian medicines. Listen into these conversations with experienced practitioners that go deep into how this ancient medicine is alive and unfolding in the modern clinic. Hey friends, before we get into today's conversation, I want to remind you that Qiological is coming up to its first anniversary. And for that anniversary show, I'd like to have one of you join me. So if you've been listening to the show and you've been thinking, hey, I'd like to be on Qiological, or I've got something that I'd like to discuss, or I've got something that I'd like to share, send me an email, or better yet, record your voice. Send me the idea that you'd like to talk about, and I'm going to put all of the good ideas into a hat. I'm going to pull one out and have one of you on the show. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and having one of you join me here on the show. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shu has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a Qiological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Qiological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at qiological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there, I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shu because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology, and you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Cheological. You probably already know my guest today, and if you haven't met him in person, you've certainly been touched by the books that he's helped to publish and bring to us, or some of the many lectures that he's given on tape over the years or in person. Dan Bensky has been around teaching us, helping us with our Chinese medicine since there were Westerners doing Chinese medicine here in the United States. So I don't really need to give him much of an introduction. You probably already know this cat. But I want to say this. Dan, as long as he's been doing Chinese medicine, and it's been a long time, one of the things I found interesting about this guy is that he is a perpetual student. I was fortunate recently to be in Nanjing, China, where I got to spend a little time with Dr. Huang Huang, who is the author of Shi Da Lei Fang, the 10 Key Formula Families. And Dan also happened to be nearby at that point. So I suggested, hey, why don't we get together? Let's have dinner. We'll go hang in Dr. Huang's clinic for a day. You know, it's wonderful to be able to walk into a clinic with someone as seasoned as Dan is and be the student. You know, it's so easy for us. The more that we get to know what we do and feel confident with it and get some experience under our belt, to think we know a thing or two, but there's always room to learn something. And so I'm really happy to have Dan Bensky here with me today to talk about Chinese medicine, learning, and the long arc of practice. I mean, it's one thing to get a practice up and going. It's another thing to keep yourself interested and motivated for 40 plus years. Dan, welcome to Cheological.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael.
Yeah, so you were here a few months ago with John O'Connor. We were talking about the early days of Eastland Press.
Yeah, that was a bunch of old guys shooting the breeze.
Old guys shooting the breeze. I'm not quite as old as you, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to get into with this conversation actually has something to do with being an old guy or an old person, in a sense. You've been at this a long time, and I wouldn't say I've been at it a long time, but you know, after 20 years, it's not a short time. And there's so many conversations that I hear these days about people starting off in practice and how you start and how you get your business going and, you know, just getting your feet under you. Those are really important questions. Those are important issues to resolve, you know, and you got to resolve them if you're going to have a practice. But it occurs to me that the stuff that gets us started is often not the stuff that keeps us going. And the stuff that might keep us going at one point isn't the stuff that keeps us going at another point. So you've been at this, I don't even know how many years you've been at this.
About 45.
No, 45. That's probably significantly older than many of our listeners here, I suspect.
I'm sure that's true.
I'm a little curious to know, to start with, how'd you get started with this Chinese medicine stuff? I mean, a lot of folks, you know, it's like, oh, I always wanted to be a doctor or something like that. What got you going? What sort of opened your eyes to this? I mean, I don't suspect you learned about it in high school.
No, I'm the opposite, actually. I got interested in East Asian culture as a young boy by accident. And that's another story, but just by accident. And so I went to college at the University of Michigan, primarily in my own mind to learn Chinese. And after a couple of years, it was pretty obvious that if I was going to learn Chinese, I had to go to some place where people spoke Chinese. So this is 1972, and that meant Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And after I'd been there a couple months, I got super ill. I had very, very high fever, 103, 104. I was coughing up stuff that, like from a bad science fiction movie. I was delirious. I was very, very thin. I'd lost a tremendous amount of weight. I had gone to see a local physician of Western medicine, and then I'd even gone to see a kind of Canadian missionary MD who had given me a whole slew of antibiotics and stuff like that. And didn't work. And so I'm just kind of hanging out there. And I believe it was my landlady, though I'm not sure, said I should go see like a Chinese doctor. And I was like, you mean like that folk medicines? If they like still do that, right? Hey, you gotta be kidding me. So, but I didn't have any other choices. And anyway, the story, I just went to a guy down the street, and it was unimpressive to me in many, many ways. He's dirty, the shop was dirty. It had like walrus penises and stuff like that laid out. And I didn't know what they were, but I knew that, and he's disheveled. He goes into the back room with me, which is even dirtier, and takes my pulse for a long time. So at that point, I thought, maybe I should just lend him my watch. I don't know what he was doing. And he gave me what I thought looked like yard waste. It had, only things I know it had in it, it had pang da hai, and it had chan tui. So it had like this big, like a bunch of yard waste and insect molting. So I took it back, and I went back to sleep. I was so tired from the expedition, and I think my landlady again brewed it up for me, and I remember looking at like this looks and smells like the river Styx, right? Like you'd have to be one desperate son of a bitch to drink this stuff.
And you were.
And I was, and I drank it, and when I woke up, I felt a little better, and within I think gave me 3 packets. I felt completely fine except for being tired. And so I thought, oh, this is something I should look into. And so I spent about 7-8 months banging on people's doors. I met Ted Kapchuk around that time, and we ended up going to Macau after I think maybe talking to around 100 people in Taiwan, with unsuccessfully for lots of reasons. And so that's how I got interested. So my interest is very personal on a certain level, but I'm very, very sure at the beginning, I thought, all this all this diagnosis and philosophy, well, that's all fun, but that must be nonsense. And once I figure out what the real active ingredients are, then we can like do something real with this stuff. So I think that's completely turned around 180 degrees. But that's how I got interested. And this is just one last old guy tidbit. When we were in Macau, this Cultural Revolution is still going on in China, and I would say the vast majority of people who knew us were quite convinced that the reason that we were CIA agents, and that this was a very, very bad cover. So, and I know that some people thought that because they would tell me like, you CIA people are stupid. Who would ever believe you'd be here studying Chinese medicine? That's like stupid. You should come up with a better cover than that. So yeah, that's how I got interested.
That's pretty funny.
But, yeah.
I am often surprised at least for me, how often I'm wrong about something. My first impressions about something. I wasn't quite in the dire straits that you were, but I had some issues that eventually took me to Chinese medicine. And it took a friend of mine badgering me to like go try acupuncture. Because, I lived in Seattle. I thought I was an open-minded kind of guy, but it just didn't make any sense. It was too far-fetched. I had nothing to hang any sort of conceptual concept on. as to how it might be helpful.
That was one of our problems was, in the 70s, someone like would tell us something, we had no way to evaluate it. It was almost to the point, Michael, you think, oh, what this person says makes sense. That must be wrong, right? Studying Chinese medicine shouldn't make sense because we don't know anything about it. So that was a tussle that went on. Anyway, so it did take a while to find.
Well, that might explain why, especially in the beginning of studying Chinese medicine, it's really confusing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it really doesn't make sense. And it's a complex subject. I mean, Chinese medicine, it's not like one integrated thing. It's like all these different aspects, right? All these different traditions, all these different pieces. It could be anything from a scholarly tradition, to some guy who's learned how to use external herbs really well. He can treat, people that fall down and break bones and stuff like that, right? I mean, it's all over the place. Not particularly integrated, like our Western mind would like to put it.
Right. I think that's one of its strongest points. It's got incredible amount of flexibility because you can use all sorts of different approaches and viewpoints and to kind of figure out what you can do that will help this particular person the best.
I would agree that it's one of the strengths. I think it also makes it really hard to learn. And especially, at least I've found, it's almost like in the beginning, you need a scaffolding, like when you're building a building, right? You need some kind of framework so you can get the job done. At a certain point, when the building is built, the scaffolding comes down. You got a building. And it seems that there's a lot of scaffolding type theories and ideas, ways of approaching Chinese medicine that get us started. But I'm not sure that's what takes us the long way down the road. I mean, it's like sometimes you come up to something and you go, yeah, maybe it's a little different than I thought or how I was trained or what the book said.
Yeah, I think there's a couple, maybe even one level deeper issues, Michael. One of them, which is, I think, really important and took me a long time to hopefully learn, is that certainly our medicine has nothing to do with being right. It only has to do with being helpful. And that if you want to be right all the time, then you're going to force your patients into some kind of, Procrustean bed. You're going to try and force them into some one set of theories so that you can be right and you won't help them. So I think that's a real hard thing. Most people who want to study something want to be right at it. And Chinese medicine is really not about being right. You can spin all these theories that show how right you are, but if the person doesn't get better, in effect, you're wrong. So I think that's one thing it's hard. And another thing I think that's hard is that we're trained, I believe, to think that precision and accuracy are the same. But lots of times in East Asian medicine, they're completely different. That the accurate ideas are kind of murky. They're not really set in stone. They're not so clearly delineated. And so if you make something very, very precise, you do some kind of violence to it. And you don't actually understand it. And this was, brought home to me when we were in Macau. This happened to me all the time. We would talk about, because most of our classmates in Macau were the daughters and sons of people who did Chinese medicine. So, they would be talking about.
They weren't spies like you.
Well, they were spies. So they weren't. So we talk about like dampness. They all understood. They all knew what dampness was, but we would try to get some kind of very precise definition of dampness. It was always, well, it's kind of like that. And so I think that's something that's, I don't know, expand your mind or make your mind more flexible, but to get to the point, and this is something that, this struggle and this appreciation of these issues, they don't go away. There's still stuff that you have to work with. No, I have to work with every day. Like, what's going on with this patient? How precise do I want to be? How okay am I with, like, oh, my initial hit on them is wrong. It's very common, I know, in acupuncture in the moment and in herbal medicine over time, where you have to work by just doing a test. Like, I don't know it's one of these 2 or 3 things, so I'll try one of them and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think one of the problems that younger practitioners not only but get into is, oh, it's one of these 3 things, I'll do some treatment that's all of them, right?
Yeah, that's not going to help.
That's not going to help, and then you don't know
Not at all.
anything. And so you just pick one, and you have a reason, maybe not a strong one, to pick one or the other, but you have to be, oh, that one was wrong. Okay, that person made them worse. Good. Now I know it's not that one. Let's try the next one. And I think as long as you're open with your patients, it's fine. I mean, and I'm certainly, know lots of practitioners who have more experience than me and for longer periods of time, and they still work that way sometimes. So if your goal is to be right, you don't want to do that, because sometimes you're going to be wrong. But if your goal is in the end to help the patient, that's just one way to do things.
Yeah. The point that you make about talking to your patient about this, I have found that this is really helpful. If I am really clear that I'm not clear, but I'm also clear that it could be this, it could be that. And I let them know the situation. It's not like I'm the guy got all the answers. Of course, people are looking for doctors that have the answers, right? I mean, we're under a lot of pressure because people want answers. We'd like to have them if we can, but there's, when people come into our office, they're probably used to not having answers, or they wouldn't be in our office, right?
Exactly.
They've already looked for help. Hasn't helped. So I find if I can get a little bit out of my Mr. Smart Guy mode and be straight with the patient, I'm not sure what this is, but I've got a few ideas. It could be this, it could be that. I'm going to choose one. We're going to go in this direction. And if I'm wrong, here's what you can expect to happen, right? And if I'm right, you're going to get better in these other ways. Often people will get on board with that. But I have found that it's taken years of, God, I don't know what it is, maybe just sitting with people to be able to sit in front of a patient and go, I don't know. And not take that as a place of stopping, but actually as a place of starting.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, part of my sojourn in mainstream medicine that pushed me in the opposite direction, and they always talk about patient compliance. I hate that word. Why would they comply with us? Who are we to make them comply? So I always talk about patient cooperation, because they're the people with the problem, right? And I think any socioeconomic background, you bring them in, like, here's what's going on, here's how I understand stuff, here's let's try this, how does that sound? And I don't give them too many details about how they'll feel bad if it's wrong, because that primes the pump for them to feel that. But I just tell them it's an experiment. We'll do this for 3 days, 5 days, whatever. If it's herbs, no, if it's acupuncture, the palpation helps us know right away. But for herbs, it doesn't work that way. So I don't remember any. I mean, people are excited. They like to be, as they should. They like to be part of the process. They're not just some beidongda. What's the word? They're not some passive recipient of my munificence. They're like they're the people with the problem. They have, and again, one thing we know from our medicines very clearly is that it's the patient's response to what we do that's the treatment. It's not what we do. So if we can bring them in, it helps them, and it also makes it easier for us. So it's a good situation.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So, let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable: raising your fees. I know, this is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip: Give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter of fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I want to come back to this thing about being wrong for a moment, because for me, this has been a key element in my learning over the years. I remember the first week in acupuncture school, we had Dr. Ma going over a case with us. And actually, I think most of our teachers went over some cases, and they went over cases about how they got it really wrong.
Yeah, that's right. I remember. Yeah.
Right. And I suspect that a lot of us, regardless of where we go to school, we hear these stories, right? And we really appreciate these practitioners that can give us, that view. Oh, here's what I thought. Here's how I was wrong. Here's how I turned it around. They're great stories. We love to hear them. But in that moment of being wrong, in that moment when the wheels have just come off the bus of the treatment, we thought we knew what was going on, and now we're face to face with someone and like, bang, I don't know. That's being in that, as opposed to hearing a lovely story about it, are two really, really different things. Yeah?
Yeah, no.
Have you got what are your thoughts about when you're in those moments of, yep, this is not working and I don't know what to do?
So I think I have a few thoughts. I have quite a bit of experience with this. So because I think if you put yourself out for people who are in deep trouble, it's not going to work certainly right away all the time. If you expect otherwise, it's silly. So one thing I think is really important to remember, and it's very hard for us, is that it's not really about us. So we're just conduits for whatever kinds of treatment or ideas we come up with. So it's just the same way when you treat someone and you get fabulous results, it's also like not about you. It's just one of those things that happens. So you want more of the former than the latter. But so that's one thing. And then I think for me, my first thought is, this is maybe a personality quirk, is okay, can I think quickly what I did wrong? What I either did wrong by I did something wrong or I missed something. And then the next thing is, okay, well, what can I do now that will help the person? And usually it's going to be something really simple, right? Are they really depleted? Are they really stuck? Do they need someone just to hold their hand for a bit? Or do I need to let them just do their thing? So I think, and then if I figured out, what I did that didn't work, I can go back and restart at that point after things have settled down. Does that make sense? But I think the first thing is like, okay, what's wrong? And then what is the simplest thing I can do to like stabilize the situation? And I think for me, the realization that it's not about you, not about me, is a very thing that's very calming, both for me and the patient. I'm not in a tizzy. I'm just I'm not, I wouldn't say relaxed, but I'm quite calm, because it's just, this is something that happens sometimes. Let's just relax and figure out where to go from there. Where for me, I think, oh my God, I'm like an idiot, then I wouldn't know what to do. And that I would communicate that sense of disease to the patient who's already has enough problems without that. So I think that's what I sometimes particularly when you push things and you say, I'm just going to do this, it's like, oh, that is completely wrong. And you have to like stabilize things and start over again.
Your point too about when it goes really well,
Right. Yeah, of course.
not to own that too much as well. I mean, it's really easy to. It's easy to go, oh yeah, I kind of got this dialed in, and now I know what I'm doing, and I'm competent, and I'm worth the money, and
Yeah,
blah blah. I mean, all the noise in our head, right?
It's all the same.
But I find when I start thinking I really know something and I got it down, I am asking for trouble.
Indeed.
And it does, if I cannot take in the, oh, Michael Max, you're so great, you fixed my back, not let it puff me up. I think it does help to be a little calmer when it's like, oh my God, now what?
Yeah, I mean, and also it's
it's almost like a meditative practice that way.
correct. I mean, it's real. It's you do what you do. Sometimes if the things juncture's just right, you have fabulous results, and sometimes not. And I mean, if everything goes haywire all the time, you probably are incompetent. But if it never goes haywire, then you're not really helping. You're not helping some other people that you should be helping.
Yeah. As I was saying earlier, there's stuff that gets us started in our practice. I mean, we have to learn how to be business people. I've been doing this about 20 years. When I graduated, actually, when I went to acupuncture school, I knew that when I got out, there were not any jobs for this. I mean, these days it's different. There are some jobs. But when I got out, I knew I was going to have to make my own business. And, to be a practitioner, you got to figure out business. You got to figure out how you are with patients. You got to figure out a lot of stuff. All those are essential, and they're like it's like learning differential diagnosis in a way. It's basic tools you need so that you can become a practitioner. But after 10 or 15 years, there's other stuff that becomes motivating. And I suspect after 20 or 30, there's other things that become motivating in your practice. As you look back on 45 years, is there kind of any sort of trajectory or sort of way stations or points where you notice, oh, my practice was like this, but now it's turning into something else?
Kind
Does that
of.
question make sense?
I don't know if my practice has changed all that much. I mean, I think the thing that I think is crucial in order to maintain a practice is continuing interest in your patients and in the work that you do. So a couple times in the last 5 or 6 years, I've met people who do acupuncture who have, whatever counts as successful practices, who tell me that their practice is boring. And you know me pretty well, Michael. So I just tell them, oh well, then you should get another job. So if you find this kind of work boring, you shouldn't be doing it, because there's nothing boring about it. So I guess what they were telling me is they had these protocols, and they have all these people with low back pain, and they do basically the same thing on low back pain. And that's like something that's maybe it works for making a living, but it doesn't work for the patients and doesn't work for you. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I think I find, because I did go to osteopathic school, which in the United States is like a Western medical school, and I've kept up with some of my classmates, and I think over time they have become more judgmental in their work and as people. And I think one of the huge things that practicing this medicine has done for me is it's made me less judgmental. I'm still a very judgmental person, but much less judgmental. And also, I think they, as a rule, like people less than they used to like people. And I like people a lot more than I used to like them. So I think as you kind of just interact with people at this level, it does lots of beneficial things for you. And that's, I think, a big deal for me. I mean, I don't know if you know, when we were first started, maybe when you went to Siam, we had this really small place, and the first time we did interviews for prospective students, they wanted to use my room as my treatment room. And it just didn't work, because in the treatment room, I don't judge people at all. I just try to figure out what I could do to help them. And so we had these people come in, and we're doing the interview, and I say, "Can you just lie down on the table here for a second? I need to check your pulse." So no, I said we have to do the interview someplace else, because I've been trained, like in this room, I don't judge people. They're one of my osteopathic teachers told me, in the treatment room, there are no bad patients. There's only bad doctors. And in the class, inside the classroom, there are no bad students. There are only bad teachers. When you go outside the room, it's it's a different scene. But in the room, you have to have this kind of mentality to do the work. Something that took a lot of repetition for me to get, but I did get that. In my private life, I'm as judgmental as anybody else, but in my clinic life, I'm not. It's quite astounding to me. And I think that lack of judgment kind of helps you get better results, because again, it gets back to trying to figure out how to help the person versus trying to show the person that you're right. I mean, but I never argue with patients about, oh, I want them to do this, they don't want to do it. I will well, here's the reasons I think you should do it. So I don't want to do that. Okay, I mean, the taken to extremes. I don't know if you get this in your practice, but I often give people with back pain some kind of exercises, and sometimes they'll come back and they'll go, "Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel, I didn't do the exercises." And I'll move my back around and go, "Oh, I don't think you should be sorry to me. My back is fine." Because it's not about my back. It's not about me. It's it's your back. You don't want to do it. Okay. So I think that that kind of interest in people, and that keeps you going. And they teach you so many interesting things, and you hear all of this stuff that you never heard about, or they tell you things that are exactly what you heard about that you thought were BS. It's one of my favorite. One example is I had a patient, this is maybe 20 years ago. He was late 60s, retired insurance salesman, or mid-level insurance executive. And we had these different problems. And I often, when I do an intake for the first time, the last thing is to say to the person, well, is there anything you think might be interesting that you've never talked to any other healthcare practitioner about? And he said, oh, well, I have this. He looked really sheepish, but he looked like, well, okay, I have this sense that in my abdomen, it feels like there's I have a tree that's trying to grow there, but it can't because it's inside a box. I said, oh, we have a word for that in Chinese medicine. It's called kun, right? And here's the character. It's a tree inside a box, right? I mean, this guy, I think his only interaction with Chinese culture was he had chop suey once or twice. So he was not prime, but he had this exact same feeling. So sometimes when you just let people talk, they will tell you things that you're like, really? That's real? That's real? So I think that's something. The other thing I think for me that is a big change in my practice, which is, this is embarrassing to talk about how you were wrong before, is when I first came back to the States, or I came back to the States in 76, people would say to me, well, when you see your patients, then you don't talk to your patients. I go, I don't need to talk to my patients. I can feel their pulse. I don't talk to them. Why would I do that? right? So that's like, no, that's not the way it works here. So I had to change that. And then when people would ask me to describe what I found, I would say something like, this is incredibly embarrassing, but I would say, well, we have like a half an hour. So I can either give you a treatment in a half an hour, or I can explain the diagnosis in a half an hour. It's up to you. And every so often I'd have a person say, well, I'll pay for half an hour of explanation and a half an hour of treatment. So that is incredibly arrogant and stupid idea that I had. And so I've come now, I believe very, very strongly that if I cannot describe what I think is wrong with the person in a way that anyone can understand in 2 minutes or less, it just means that I don't understand it either. So if I can't get past the jargon and everything to have a average person understand what I think the Chinese diagnosis means, it means that I don't understand it. So now, I explain whether they want to know or not. Almost every patient, I'll spend a couple minutes like, okay, from our perspective, this is what's going on with you. Because I think that's very important. Again, it's part of that, cooperation, bringing them on board. We're not doing this exotic, wacky stuff. We're doing stuff that everyone can understand. So that's an example in my practice where I've changed about as much as one can change in one little thing. It's a big deal, I think, to actually have people understand that this East Asian medicine isn't some whatever esoteric, deep wisdom. It's really about people interacting with their bodies and the environment, right? I mean, that's what it's all about.
And we should be able to explain it in those terms.
You should be able to explain it. You should explain it those terms. And it's, I have to say, every so often I'll tell the patient what I just said, and then it's like, oh, I can't do it. I cannot explain to you in 2 minutes. Oh, I guess I really don't understand this as well as I should. So that happens.
Back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board. That happens every so often.
We're going to take a short break here. Toby Daly's got some helpful information about treating wind cold with food.
Hi, Toby here again. I hope you're enjoying the conversation in this show. And speaking of conversations, you can have a conversation with your patients around how they can use food as medicine with the Chinese Nutritional Strategies app. I use the app to answer the question, what foods can I recommend for my patients with a wind cold pattern? The answer, drawn from the Chinese medical classic texts, are alcohol, black pepper, chives, cinnamon, garlic, fresh ginger, leeks, licorice root, mustard greens, onion, rosemary, and scallions. The Chinese Nutritional Strategies app has diagnosis patterns like wind cold in its database of more than 300 common foods, along with their temperature, flavor, actions, indications, notes, and seasonal recommendations. The database is searchable by any of these criteria, and sorting through it allows the practitioner to compile a list of recommended foods and then share those recommendations via email or as a hard copy with the patient. More information is available at ChineseNutritionApp.com. Now, let's listen to the next half of the show.
So one of the things that I found helpful about doing that myself is often patients will have really disparate things going on with them, things that seem really like they don't hang together, and it's confusing to other doctors, and it's confusing to themselves. And sometimes our Chinese medicine way of looking at it and our way of thinking and working will bring these pieces together. So they might actually see that a fall they took when they were 18 that did something to their hip might have something to do with a menstrual period that changed around that time. And that might have something to do with headaches that showed up 3 years later. And because we can see, at least Chinese medicine offers us the possibility of seeing how some of these things might be interrelated with each other. And sometimes people are quite astonished to hear, wow, how did you think about that? And I'm thinking, well, I didn't think about it. There's this way that we have of working. that gives us a particular perspective.
Exactly.
I think people get help from hearing that as well.
And also, I mean, I think one of the other things is if you can explain things, if people understand why you want to do what you do, they don't have problems, brewing up herbs or doing different kinds of things because I have this problem. These things are going to change in this way that I understand. Okay, let's go. So I think the cooperation goes up quite a bit when the people are not passive receptors but active participants in their own health. Again, there's lots of variation in personality. So some people don't want to be active participants. And you have to be able to figure out how to interact with those people a little differently. But by and large, the people who come to our offices, by the time they get to us, they're pretty active. They want to be active participants in helping themselves.
I've got a question about some Chinese.
Okay.
You up for it?
Sure. We'll find out.
So Chinese is such a funny, slippery language. There's a lot of terms that were given in acupuncture school. And they sound great and they're interesting and they're poetic. And they're really hard to understand. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
The three treasures, Jing, Qi, and Shun, right?
Yes.
23 years ago, I was introduced to these. I'm still working out just what they are.
Well, Michael, I think this gets back to that precision versus accuracy thing that we were talking about earlier in the podcast. That if you want a very, very precise definition of any of those things, that definition is going to be not helpful and inaccurate. That they're all kind of murky ideas because they're real and they're about life, and everything about life is a little murky. And so I think if you look at them in different ways, you'll get a sense of, oh, that's what this is about here. And if, from my perspective, if that's what you have versus something that you can write in a very precise way, you probably have a better idea. So I think we have a sense of this. You have to have a very clear idea, but I'm gonna say actually what you want to have is a very murky idea. And that murky idea gives you, again, the flexibility to understand and apply these ideas in different circumstances. Because I think part of Chinese, I mean, again, maybe precision is the wrong word here, but Chinese is a emblematic language. And things, so like this idea of emblematicness goes through everywhere. So like this, get off the language, but you take the pulse, someone's pulse. The pulse is an emblem for everything that's going on in the person. And all these different ways of talking about it are just ways of understanding that emblem. So you talk about the shun, you can talk about it. First of all, there's more than one thing called shun. That's very, very clear. They talk about the wu shun and then the shun. And then you look at the character has a sense of expansion to it if you take the character apart. But if you try to say, oh, it's like, I don't know what to say, it's the activity of the frontal cortex, that's the shun. I mean, that would be taking this argument to absurd levels, but that's just not helpful. That's not really going to help you deal with it and help people. No, the tongue has shun, the eyes have shun, they have shun disturbance, which, again, we've talked about this before. Sometimes that just means the practitioner doesn't like the patient, so they say the patient has shun disturbance. That's not a correct diagnosis, at least not of the patient, maybe of the practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what I would say to this issue, that if you kind of get a sense of, oh yeah, it kind of works here, it kind of works there, that may be what's going on. even, that's going to be more useful than trying to have a very precise, the chi is these 5 things, 1, 2, 3, that's just not, that's not what it's about. I don't think that's not what Chinese is about, but it's also not what living things are about in the way that we appreciate them. Does that answer, does that in any way respond to your thought?
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. But it brings up this other question, which is, how do we know when we're sort of within the, fun way of what a character is about? Fun way is like range, scope. How do we know we're in the fun way of a character and not just making shit up because it sounds nice or we want it to be so, or we just have this idea?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is, comes from my time studying at the UW here. You should never really think about characters. You should only think about words. All the characters are words. They're a way of writing down words. They're not ways of writing down concepts that aren't words. They never, ever, ever have been that. Okay, so that's like the first thing. And so, and someone, it's Chinese, what the fangwei is, what the kind of is not determined by us. It's determined by the people who've been using these words, and the words change over time for the last 2,500 years. So if you say, oh, I have this idea that this character means this, and no one in China has ever really realized that the character really means this, that's just bullshit. that's like the definition of like, no, it's not. You can't say, oh, this word in another language, no one in that language has really understood it. I understand it, because I'm sitting here drinking coffee in Seattle, making it up. So I think that's my understanding of it. I mean, first thing, it's so when you, just like if you take the etymology of an English word, you can see where things come from, but they come from words. They don't come from abstract concepts. And the Chinese writing has always been about words, not about some philosophical concepts. Maybe the gua of the I Ching, the hexagrams, that's a different thing. But when you talk about even the words that used to describe them, they're words. They're not kind of, so you start, I've had people tell me, oh yeah, no one in China really understood this character, but I understand it. And it's like, what are you drinking? like, it's a Chinese word. You can't like say, I understand it better.
Yeah. Well, and of course, and like you were saying, words also change over time. They change with context.
Sure. And again, lots of characters write more than one word. Like, and again, I don't know what we have a word in English, mean, MEAN. Well, it has that spelling reflects different words. Like, what do I mean? Don't be mean to me. Those are not really the same thing, but they're written the same way. And the same kind of thing happens in Chinese, that
All the time.
there's a sound, there's a word that has a certain sound. There's another word that has a similar sound. So they'll use the same way to write it, even though they don't necessarily have any meaning connections. That does happen sometimes too.
And then you've got the words that are written the same, but they have different meanings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah. So it's a complicated subject but it's, because it is written not in as characters or as not as phonetics. You have all this other level, certain level of Chinese poetry is visual, right? You can't have visual, real poetry in English. So there are advantages and disadvantages to any kind of writing system. But the Chinese, of course, near and dear to my heart, has lots of really interesting things about it. But you just can't sit around and think about, oh, I wonder this character looks like that to me, so that must be what it really means. That's just hilarious. But
at the same time, you can look at a character. One of my favorites is Ting, listen.
Yeah.
And it tells you how to listen. It's got an ear, it's got eyes, it's got a heart. I mean, it's built into the character.
Well, also, another letter, which works on all sorts of different levels, which maybe not for the anyway, is the word sheng for sage. In our culture, we're about seers, right? We call the seer, right? But sheng means the hearer. It's very clear in the character. And it's also clear if you look at ancient Chinese philosophy that they were the person who could hear things was the person who was the sage, not the seer, not the visionary. So that's a difference and that has a lot to do with the basics of Chinese medicine, as this resonance, what qi, probably some aspects of what qi originally was about. So you can look at the characters and you can see that, oh yeah, it's written this way. That part of the etymology is visual. So you don't have to be a Latin scholar or a Greek scholar in terms of English to see. You just have to be someone who can say, oh, now sometimes the parts of the character that we see were not the parts that were, like the moon and the flesh. That kind of thing happens. Also, always 100% clear, but sometimes it is. And I think this idea about the sage being someone who is receptive, right? Who kind of is in the vibe, versus the person who is seeing things and directing things. That has maybe a core value in terms of understanding some of what that means, what that word means.
Well, it takes you down a whole different rabbit hole,
right?
When you start thinking about what a sage is in terms of what aspect of their perceptual frameworks they're attending to.
That's right. And again, what you were talking about earlier, we're not the first people to, oh, look at that. That's an interesting thing. We understand that the people before us, no one this has been written about in Chinese for thousands of years. So I think that's another way to tell that you're probably, doing something worthwhile, even though it may not be correct, but it's not just nonsense making things up, is where there's a tradition of people thinking about this aspect of the word.
Yeah, well, that is one of the great things about, Chinese medicine in particular. There's been discussions going on about this for as long as they've been writing about this.
Absolutely. In some cases, maybe even longer.
Yeah. I know that you've got a busy practice, and I mean, you don't just practice, but you do translation, you do editing. I mean, you're involved in all kinds of stuff with Chinese medicine. I'm wondering where you get the time, or how you, I don't know if manage is the right word, but how do you get so much done within a 24-hour a day time frame?
I'm going to answer your question in a different way. I think the issue for people who go into practice is they have to develop some insight into how they work. So this goes to the very basic issue of, I think one of the binary issues of our practice is, do you specialize or do you not? Right? Do you focus on women's diseases, or do you focus on ophthalmology, or do you just do whatever comes in the door? And I think one of the main deciding factors of that has to be how you work. So there are people that if they just see whoever comes in the door, they get flustered, or they feel that they're doing everything too superficially. It's not satisfying to them. And those people, like, they need to specialize, and they have to find something that really they want to dive deep into, both on all levels. No, they want to see those kind of patients over and over and over again every day, right? They want to read about that kind of stuff in our literature over and over again whenever they get a chance. And they want to look in the modern scientific discussion of that kind of problem. They want to know all of that's what they want to do. And if they do that, they'll have a long and productive career. But for other people, like I'm not, that's not who I am. I'm a scatterbrained person. And so I need to do a bunch of different things because otherwise I lose concentration. So it's like I can concentrate pretty well for short periods of time. Like my brother used to say, I have a fantastic memory. It's just kind of short. So, so for me, it never really occurred to me to specialize. Given my background, maybe I would specialize in orthopedic stuff or stuff like that. But that's just not who I am. I need to see different kinds of people. Like my favorite days by far, and I get them every so often, is I will have at least one patient from every decade of life. I'll have a baby, I'll have a teenager, have someone in their 20s, a couple people in their 30s, someone in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 80s, in their 90s. I have 100, that would be like, that's my ideal day. I don't care what the problems are, right? But I like to see, like, I have seen like a 96-year-old and a 6-month-old in the same day with everybody in between. That's like, that's like nirvana for me as a practitioner. And so in terms of the other things I do, it's the same thing. Oh, I like to read. Like I feel maybe because of not my age, but because when I got involved in this medicine, for maybe I have an inflated sense of self. So I feel I have a obligation to do what I can to promote things, to do what I can to see that in 2050, in 2080, people in the West have the option to get high quality East Asian medicine. That's just something that I think I owe my teachers who took a piece of rotten wood like myself and worked at it for so long. So the writing and the lecturing and all stuff that comes from that other people, whether you have that or not, it's up to you. Maybe most people don't have such an inflated sense of self, but it's like I need to feel good about myself. I need to try to do stuff to make this stuff available to more people and to be part of the tradition. We are part of the tradition, and part of the tradition is handing it all on. Like we have our own responsibility to add to the tradition. And so I think in terms of my own personality, doing these different things is really the only way that makes sense for me. It's not a decision. It's just a way of being.
Just the way you happen to be wired.
The way I happen to be wired. And so I think if you're wired like me, you should do stuff kind of like that. And when you have your practice, you definitely should not try to be a specialist in dermatology if you don't want to just look at rashes all day. If that's like you do, then that's what you should do. And you'll, so I think that's how I would approach that issue.
Great. Dan, always enjoyable to spend a little time hanging out and liao tian. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael. I hope this is of use to some people.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.